Hej och välkomna till Ntd Nyheter. Jag heter Dan Alfjorden. Här är våra rubriker. Vem är tuffast mot Kina? President Biden höjer tullarna för kinesisk import. TikTok tar den amerikanska regeringen till domstol. Vi får en analys. Ryssland utvidgar förtrycket av Falun Gong. CNN-artikel belyser fertilitetsindustrins natur. Utställning visar Michelangelos sista tid. Vem är tuffast mot Kina? President Biden höjer tullarna för kinesisk import, medan Trump säger att det var han som började. De två skiljer sig dock åt i sina exakta tillvägagångssätt för att skydda amerikanska industrier. Ntd's Vita huset-korrespondent Iris Tao berättar mer från Vita huset.
President Biden on Tuesday announced that he's raising tariffs on an array of Chinese imports, in particular in strategic industries, and that includes tripling tariffs on steel and aluminum to 25%, doubling the rate on semiconductors to 50%, and quadrupling tariffs on Chinese EVs to 100%. And President Biden says that's to punish China for its unfair trade practices that hurt American businesses. Watch.
China heavily subsidized all these products, pushing Chinese companies to produce far more than the rest of the world can absorb, and then dumping the excess products onto the market at unfairly low prices, driving other manufacturers around the world out of business. It's not competition, it's cheating.
The Biden administration also announced that it's now officially keeping the over $300 billion worth of tariffs imposed on China by Trump. It comes as both Biden and Trump are trying to appeal to voters as the tougher on China candidates, sometimes using strikingly similar rhetoric.
Europe is being flooded with Chinese cars, but I'm not going to allow it to happen in our car and truck industry.
They're driving manufacturing companies out of business in Europe, but we won't let that happen here in America.
The White House says Trump's tariffs are too broad, while Biden's are effective and targeted and will not raise prices on American consumers. But former President Trump this morning says Biden's new tariffs are too little, too late.
I guess they should have done it a long time ago, but they've also got to do it on other vehicles, and they have to do it on a lot of other products, because China's eating our lunch right now.
And as the Chinese government is trying to rely on a surge of exports to revive its slumping economic growth, the new tariffs can really not only deal a blow to China's global ambitions in strategic industries, but also thwart that means of revival for the Chinese economy. Reporting from the White House, Iris Tao, Ntd News.
Ungefär hälften av den kinesiska importen av elfordon kommer från västerländska tillverkare. Detta enligt den tyska förbundskanslern Olaf Scholz. Det här sa han den 14 maj vid en gemensam presskonferens när han fick frågan om potentiella EU-tullar på kinesiska elfordon.
Sollten nicht vergessen, europäische Hersteller, auch einige amerikanische, aber europäische Hersteller sind erfolgreich auf dem chinesischen Markt und verkaufen auch sehr viele Fahrzeuge, die in Europa produziert werden, nach China.
Även den svenska statsministern Ulf Kristersson kom med ett liknande budskap och sa att ett bredare handelskrig inte är rätt väg att gå. I november förra året meddelade EU-kommissionen att man undersöker kinesiska subventioner inom elfordonsindustrin. Tjänstemän fruktar att inflödet av kinesiska elfordon driver ner priserna på lokalt tillverkade modeller. Från och med 2023 rapporterade blocket att kinesiska företag utgjorde cirka 8% av Europas elfordonsmarknad, och den siffran förväntas nå 15% 2025. Men när utredningen är över kan EU komma att höja tullarna på kinesiska elfordon utöver den nuvarande tullsatsen på 10%. TikTok tar den amerikanska regeringen till domstol, det vill säga när dess kinesiska ägare kämpar för att behålla sin kontroll över appen och tillgången till sina över 170 miljoner amerikanska användare. Inspelningen gjordes den 7 maj.
Jimmy, thanks so much for joining us. Good to see you again. To begin, TikTok and its Chinese parent company ByteDance are suing the U.S. government over the bill calling for its divestment. Now, what stood out to you about the lawsuit?
Well, it's great to be with you. What we're seeing is a lot of whining and even more distortions from TikTok. They've recycled some of the talking points that they've used in the past. At the core of this issue, TikTok is trying to claim that it has a constitutional right to operate in the United States of America. But the best way to look at this company is it is the U.S. subsidiary of ByteDance. a company that is closely linked to China's military civil fusion programs. ByteDance has worked with Sugon, which is a company that helps the PLA test hypersonic weapons and does simulations for that. So to go out and say that TikTok has a First Amendment right or it can claim protections under the Fifth Amendment is pretty amusing, frankly. But they say that there's a lot of speculation about the app in this petition that they just filed today. But the fact of the matter is that you have the former director of the National Security Agency saying that TikTok is a gun pointed at the head of our country. If that isn't convincing, I don't know what is. But the intelligence community is pretty clear on this, and they know that ByteDance has been blacklisting opponents of the CCP from all of their apps, including TikTok. This is very concerning, and the petition doesn't even begin to address these issues.
You mentioned the PLA, or People's Liberation Army, which is China's military. Now, given that TikTok itself says the Chinese regime has made clear that it won't permit a divestment of ByteDance's algorithm, what national security concerns does this raise?
TikTok's lobbyists on Capitol Hill have spent the previous 3 to 4 years arguing that their company is not beholden to the Chinese government. But here you have this court filing submitted today in which they say that they cannot divest, or ByteDance can't divest itself of TikTok because the Chinese government won't allow it to do so. I mean, it's just the height of irony. And it really undercuts everything that TikTok's talking heads have been saying for the past several years. So that should really concern every American. If the Chinese government is able to exercise control over what ByteDance is able to do in terms of selling its various apps, what else can the Chinese Communist Party force ByteDance to do? We have no evidence to suggest that ByteDance wouldn't comply with China's national intelligence law, which would require it to share information about its U.S. users. And there's evidence that ByteDance has actually spied on American journalists using their location data through TikTok. So the same could be done to journalists, politicians, and other prominent Americans. And the lawsuit doesn't even begin to address these issues and to address concerns about this.
And Jimmy, expanding on that, China doesn't even allow TikTok within its own country. They have a different version called Douyin. What's so special about the algorithm that the Chinese regime wouldn't want to divest?
The algorithm is controlled from ByteDance's headquarters in Beijing. So there's a lot of conversation about this Project Texas initiative where TikTok claims that it can wall off user data and basically isolate all of this from Chinese interference. But that really is not going to work like that. I mean, if the argument is that it's impossible to divest TikTok and separate it from ByteDance, but at the same time, you're claiming that this algorithm, is so integral to how TikTok works and it can only be dealt with in China. There's an inconsistency there. And that's why Congress went ahead and passed this legislation to ensure that Americans are protected from the threat of the Chinese Communist Party controlling this massive publishing platform. TikTok calls itself a publishing platform in the lawsuit. And it really begs asking, just how they're using that, how they're making editorial decisions to promote certain content that might be favorable to the CCP or unfavorable to America. So I think that all of this raises a lot of new questions. And even just in the legal filing we saw today, it's the start of a new conversation that all Americans and their elected representatives should be taking part in.
And all of this does come as a former TikTok executive is actually suing the platform Monday, alleging that the Chinese parent company ByteDance has a lot more control over the platform than it claimed. You've covered TikTok quite extensively. Give us some more examples of the inconsistencies with what TikTok has said.
TikTok has, on numerous occasions, said things that simply aren't true. So to go back to the example of when ByteDance spied on American journalists using TikTok, the company denied it. They went after Forbes, and which reported this out initially, And they said that Forbes wasn't reporting with integrity, but then eventually ByteDance was forced to admit the truth. So they've lied about that. They've also lied about where U.S. user data is stored. There are inconsistencies in terms of the access that engineers and other staffers at ByteDance headquarters in Beijing, the sort of data that they have access to. So we've seen TikTok lie again and again. And unfortunately, this new legal filing contains a number of other inaccuracies that everyone should be looking at with a significant degree of skepticism.
Jimmy Quinn, national security correspondent at the National Review. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Och TikToks algoritm för innehållsrekommendationer har återigen hamnat i rampljuset. Detta efter att USA beordrat dess kinesiska ägare ByteDance att sälja appens tillgångar i USA eller bli utslängd från appbutikerna i USA. Låt oss ta en närmare titt på hur algoritmen fungerar.
Innan TikTok var det många som trodde att teknik som bygger på användarnas sociala kontakter var den hemliga ingrediensen för en framgångsrik social media-app. Sådan teknik hjälpte Metas Facebook och Instagram att bli mycket populära. Men TikTok visade att en algoritm som drivs av förståelsen för en användares intresse kan vara ännu mer kraftfull.
TikTok is a little different from the previous generation of social networks where a lot of algorithms, built up on top of what it called a social graph. But then with TikTok, it's actually revolves around what it calls as interest signals.
Konkurrenterna har liknande intressebaserade algoritmer, men TikTok kan öka sin effektivitet med det korta videoformatet. Men det handlar inte bara om att ge användarna vad de vill ha.
If you think about YouTube, the average length of a video is about 10 minutes. So, the user interaction with it, is a lot more stagnant, when it compared to TikTok, when you get 10 seconds video, right? If you're scrolling through it, you like it or you follow it, that's sending through a lot of different data points to TikTok, which it can determine whether this is really suit your interest. So the speed at which it collects these data is unprecedented compared to a previous generation of social networks.
TikTok rekommenderar också regelbundet innehåll som faller utanför användarnas intresse, vilket företaget har sagt är viktigt för TikToks användarupplevelse. TikToks kinesiska ägare ByteDance var också tidigt ute med att använda det som kallade taggningsstrategin.
Through our conversations with some of the ex-ByteDance employees, we realized that there's one very unique advantage that TikTok has over the Western social media platforms, which is they focus very early on tagging or labeling every user and as well as every video that's on their platform. And they not only do it through machine vision, but then they also actually hire a bunch of people to manually, laboriously annotate a lot of these kind of contents and user profiles on their platforms. And as you know, in China, the labor cost is a lot cheaper. So ByteDance can afford to be deploying this strategy very quickly at a large scale, more so than its Western counterparts.
Ungern var Kinas ledare Xi Jinpings tredje och sista stopp i Europa. I Ungern väntades han tillkännage en rad investeringar i landets viktigaste industrier, vilket inkluderar batteritillverkning för elbilar och kritisk infrastruktur. Xi träffade Ungerns premiärminister Viktor Orbán i Budapest. Xi lyfte fram deras vänskap och sa att Ungern är det främsta målet för kinesiska investeringar i den central- och östeuropeiska regionen. Enligt ungerska tjänstemän kommer minst 16 bilaterala avtal att undertecknas under Xis resa. Före Ungern besökte Xi även Frankrike och Serbien. Han hoppade över en resa till platsen för Kinas tidigare ambassad i Belgrad, som av misstag bombades av NATO-missiler 1999. Enligt analytiker gjorde Xi detta för att han inte ville utlösa spänningar med västvärlden. Kina ser Ungern som en viktig inkörsport till den europeiska marknaden, och Ungern är den första EU-medlemmen som ansluter sig till Kinas Belt and Road-initiativ. Det ambitiösa infrastrukturprojektet ses till stor del som ett sätt för Peking att utöka det ekonomiska inflytandet utomlands. Förutom infrastruktur vill Ungern också bli en av världens ledande leverantörer av litiumbatterier med hjälp av Kina. Under 2022 tillkännagav nationen ett rekord på nästan 8 miljarder dollar i kinesiska investeringar i sina elbatterianläggningar. Ryska myndigheter genomförde i början av maj en husrannsakan hos 5 Falun Gong-utövare. Beslutet fattades med stöd av en kontroversiell lag som riktar sig mot organisationer, journalister och människorättsaktivister. Falun Gong, även känd som Falun Dafa, är en andlig meditationsmetod som har varit hårt förföljd i Kina sedan 1999. En domstol i Moskva beslutade på lördagen att 46-åriga Natalia Minenkova ska sitta fängslad i 2 månader till den 27 juni. Detta efter att räder utförts mot Falun Gong-utövares hem den 3 maj. Åklagarna anklagar henne för att ha begått ett allvarligt brott mot grunden för den konstitutionella ordningen och statens säkerhet. Enligt domstolshandlingarna var det för att ha organiserat Falun Gong-relaterade möten och distribuerat Falun Gong-litteratur. Ryska myndigheter har använt en lag mot att bedriva verksamhet för en oönskad organisation för att rikta in sig på över 100 organisationer tillsammans med journalister och människorättsaktivister. Lagen har ett straffvärde på upp till 6 års fängelse. Ryska myndigheter och statliga medier återgav det kinesiska kommunistpartiets desinformation om meditationsmetoden när de offentliggjorde räderna. Levi Brody, vd för Falun Dafa Information Center, berättade för Ntd att ju närmare en regim kommer KKP, desto mer kommer de att försöka att blidka dem.
Going after dissidents of the Chinese regime, going after people who are speaking out against the tyranny of the CCP.
Han säger att husrannsakningarna och gripandena väcker frågor om yttrande- och trosfrihet för alla ryssar.
I mean, if they're going to use some of these vague sort of rules that have been put in place, because again, if they're going to go after peaceful meditators, who else might they go after?
I've got a question on China and Russia.
Ntd frågade den nationella säkerhetsrådgivaren Jake Sullivan som talade på Financial Times Weekend Festival i Washington DC på lördagen. Han sa att det inte var någon överraskning att Ryssland förtrycker alla slags människor i frågor som rör yttrande, press, mötes- och religionsfrihet. Han erkände Rysslands allt djupare band med den kinesiska kommunistregimen.
Russia is increasingly relying on China for a lot of things, particularly as they have lost other avenues economically, technologically and otherwise. So this is a relationship that we look at closely, carefully.
En talesperson för Vita husets nationella säkerhetsråd sa till Ntd att administrationen är bekymrad oavsett om det händer i Kina, Ryssland eller någon annanstans i världen. USAs utrikesdepartement skriver i sin senaste rapport om mänskliga rättigheter att Ryssland missbrukade lagar mot terrorism och extremism, liksom andra åtgärder för att rikta in sig på Falun Gong, utan några trovärdiga bevis för våldsamma handlingar eller avsikter. Samtidigt som kriget rasar i Ukraina vänder sig vissa ukrainare till vad de kallar en källa till inre frid. En meditationsmetod för kropp och själ som har sina rötter i gammal kinesisk tradition. Måndagen den 13 maj hölls firandet av Falun Dafa-dagen i Kiev, Ukrainas huvudstad.
I det krigshärjade Ukraina kan man se förödelsen efter explosionerna överallt.
There was a strong explosion near our house and the windows shook. It was around 5 a.m. My heart was shaking and my body felt as limp as cotton.
Carolina och hennes man bestämde sig för att inte lämna Kiev för 2 år sedan när ryska trupper invaderade landet och började bomba. De säger att deras hemlighet för att bekämpa stress är deras tro på Falun Gong.
Through practicing the exercises, I found my inner balance again. I realized that not only could I calm myself down, but I could also help others.
Paret besökte skyddsrum i hopp om att kunna hjälpa sin omgivning. En liten grupp människor anslöt sig till dem för att lära sig de långsamma, meditativa övningarna i Falun Gong.
They realized that doing these exercises is really effective and can help them.
Falun Dafa är ett traditionellt meditationssystem som har sitt ursprung i Kina. Metoden lär ut 3 vägledande principer: sanning, medkänsla och tålamod, med betoning på hög moralisk karaktär och vänlighet mot andra. De som utövar säger att övningarna också ger fysiska fördelar. Carolina har utövat i mer än 20 år och säger att det avsevärt förbättrat både hennes hälsa och humör. Den 13 maj samlades Falun Gong-utövare i Kiev i en park för att fira Falun Dafa-dagen och introducera metoden för fler ukrainare.
We are all responsible for the energy on this earth. The hearts of the people are full of light, love and faith. We hope to bring more light to people.
En CNN-rapport blev viral för att den belyser den löst reglerade fertilitetsindustrin i USA. Det visar sig att det för närvarande inte finns några regler i USA som begränsar antalet gånger då natursperma kan användas för att skapa barn. Ntd pratar med Emma Waters för att utforska farorna med fertilitetsindustrin. Hon är forskningsassistent på Heritage Foundation och arbetar med liv, religion och familj. Och hon är gästforskare på Independent Women's Forum.
Emma Waters, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you on the show.
Of course, it's great to be here.
Now, a CNN piece is making headlines. It's titled, "I slept with my half-sibling. Woman's horror story reflects loosely regulated nature of the U.S. fertility industry." How does this even happen?
Yeah, so this is the outcome of the bizarre and unregulated fertility industry today. So this woman in particular was conceived using donor sperm, an anonymous donor sperm at that. So after joking for many years that she had nothing in common with her father, no looks, no personality similarities, she took a 23andMe DNA test that's actually been revolutionizing the way that people think about their ancestry and also discover these unknown siblings. And to her horror and surprise, she discovered that she had countless half-siblings, including someone that she actually dated in high school.
Gosh, now how common or widespread is this phenomenon, or even is there enough research to even know?
Yeah, it's a really tricky question. Again, the fertility industry is so unregulated. We have very few statistics on exactly how many children are conceived with donor egg and sperm. So we know that about 2% of all births in the United States are due to in vitro fertilization, which is the most common form of reproductive technology. But when it comes to these donor scenarios, we have no idea. Some donors conceive over 100 or even 200 children, and sometimes the donors never see the light of day.
Now, it was recently discovered that data from a Dutch sperm bank that closed in 2004 has gone missing, and that some of the men were able to father far more children than regulations permitted. That's raising concerns over accidental incest. Now, tell us, what is the state of regulation in the U.S. fertility industry?
Yeah, so in the United States, we don't have any regulation that limits the number of times donor sperm can be used to create children. So this has actually been a really big push to highlight countries like Norway, Germany, or the UK that actually limit the number of times a person can be the father or the mother through a donor conception method. But yeah, like I said, in the United States, we actually have very little regulation that limits this practice at all.
And given that, is there any regulation in the works, or what regulation do we need to prevent this accidental incest from occurring?
Yeah, this is a great question. So there are a few things. The state of Colorado has actually banned all anonymous sperm and egg donation, so that if a child is created using a sperm and egg that does not belong to the mother or father, the child has the right to know who that person is and therefore who their potential half-siblings are. There's another movement to actually make fertility fraud a punishable crime. And so this is embedded in the CNN story where it talked about fertility doctors actually using their own sperm, not the sperm that the family selected, in order to impregnate the woman, which is a very bizarre and very violating scenario where in many cases children thought that their father was their biological father, only to find out decades later that they actually have no connection to him. So many states have actually worked to penalize fertility fraud, and there's also federal level regulations that are hoping to accomplish the same thing.
And given what we are seeing here when it comes to overcoming this issue, do you think there needs to be a cultural shift when it comes to discussing this, especially since fertility is a very sensitive topic?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the primary thing to keep in mind here is that our orientation towards children should be viewing children as a gift, not a right that adults have. And so when we do that, that actually shifts our thinking so that we don't view these technologies as something that we have a right to, that we can use in whatever way possible in order to conceive a child. But it will actually cause us to think, what is best for the child in this situation? And so if we frame our legislation and even our cultural conversations around this question of what does the child need ultimately in order to thrive, I think that you'll see people move away from donor insemination. There's this inherent need among children, right, to know who their biological mother and father is, to know where they're coming from, and even know their potential siblings. And if you keep that first and foremost, these sorts of practices aren't actually helping children as much as they are maybe helping adults overcome the difficulties that they have. So I think that's a first shift that we should really keep in mind. It's this child-first approach to our fertility problems.
Emma Waters, thank you so much for your time.
Of course, thank you.
En ny utställning som utforskar de sista decennierna av Michelangelos liv och arbete öppnar i London. Den produktiva konstnären fortsätter att producera konst ända fram till de sista dagarna i sitt liv.
Michelangelo är den stora talangen bakom det imponerande taket i Sixtinska kapellet och Davidstatyn. Men den här nya utställningen på British Museum vill fokusera på en annan period i hans liv, hans sista år.
It's easy for people to forget that he goes on working until the age of almost 89, and the later works show quite a different side to him, much more introspective, much more thoughtful.
Religiös ikongrafi spelar en stor roll i utställningen, vilket kanske speglar konstnärens tro och hans funderingar över sin egen dödlighet.
We get to see more of him as a person coming to terms with these very universal human feelings that we all face as we get older, trying to weigh up if you've lived a good life and meditating on aspects of faith which he hopes will bring him to salvation.
Utställningen innehåller några sällsynta pärlor. Den 2 meter höga Epifania visas för allmänheten för första gången sedan restaureringen av den inleddes 2018.
It is of unique distinction today because the cartoon Michelangelo makes, the one-to-one drawing, the blueprint essentially is the only cartoon, complete cartoon that survives in Michelangelos hand.
Besökarna kan se tidiga utkast till några av hans berömda kompositioner, till exempel studier av figurer som så småningom skulle komma att visas i den yttersta domen, en fresk som täcker altaret i Sixtinska kapellet. Sedan finns det svartkrita och blyvita teckningar som gjordes strax före hans död decennier senare, som visar hur hans stil hade utvecklats med åldern.
He becomes slightly more interested in the spiritual interior of the figures that he represents. The figures often become a little more compact, a little more dense and weighty. At the same time, when he is dealing with the figure of Christ, for example, it can become quite light, almost ethereal.
Dessa brev ger en inblick i Michelangelos liv bortom konsten. Han skriver till sin brorson för att tacka honom för det vin som skickats från familjens gård. Ett brev som skrivit för hans räkning bär vad som sägs vara Michelangelos sista kända signatur 4 dagar före sin död.
Increasingly, that beautiful handwriting starts to become more and more shaky. And I find it very, very moving when you look at the last signature to see a hand that had, glided a pen across a sheet of paper with such effortless virtuosity, even struggling to write his own name.
En skiss över hans planer för Peterskyrkans sovsal i Vatikanen visar att hans designförmåga var lika skarp som någonsin, även om han sannolikt visste att han aldrig skulle få leva för att se den byggas. Michelangelo, The Last Decades, pågår på The British Museum i London fram till slutet av juli.
Tack för att ni har tittat och på återseende!